bold journalism,
but Drew Hernandez is a strong-minded individual.
exposing lawlessness,
Drew Hernandez, who is ideological,
finding the truth,
and use the word Antifa.
This is what they do.
battling
They're
mainstream
liars. The woke mob, all they can do is lie.
These are the front lines.
Welcome to TPUSA Live. My name is Drew Hernandez, host of Frontlines. We have a very special episode for you today. Jack Posobiec, host of Human Events Daily, is joining me on the desk. We're talking all about Great Reset, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, woke Disney, and much, much more. You don't want to miss it. But before we get into this great conversation, we all know President Joe Biden would rather blame meat producers for inflation instead of his poor economic policy. On top of that, the government has abandoned small American farms and ranches to cater to large foreign corporations. We, the American people, need to put our money where our patriotism is more now than ever. Now you can. Get American meat delivered with Good Ranchers. When you buy Good Ranchers, you use the code TPUSA, you donate $50 to us. It's easy, simple almost, but the impact is huge. Donate $50 to TPUSA and get steakhouse quality meat, chicken, and seafood by visiting goodranchers.com/TPUSA and buy your box of American meat today. And one more thing, by the way, Frontlines is now available on Apple Podcast and Spotify and other streaming services. So don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review right now. My name is Drew Hernandez, and you are now on the front lines.
Nothing more to report. With regard to food shortages, yes, we did talk about food shortages. And it's going to be real. The price of these sanctions is not just imposed upon Russia. It's imposed upon an awful lot of countries as well, including European countries and our country as well.
Jack Posobiec, here we are, brother.
What's up, Drew? I gotta say, man, congratulations on just all your success lately. You know, the show, Frontlines, just completely taken the nation by storm, as you know. But no, seriously, watching you, just come on the scene, as I've seen a lot of people come on the scene over the past couple of years, and you just exploded. You found yourself at the center of some of the biggest stories that have gone on over the past couple of cycles and everything. I don't even think we've been on air together since Kyle Rittenhouse, like since that whole trial, and just incredible to see what you've done, the way you've grown and developed and evolved into what you have now, and it's amazing. So kudos, man. Seriously.
Man, Jack, coming from you, I appreciate that a lot, man. I mean, one of the first shows that I ever really did during 2020 was when you were on air with OAN.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's just crazy
yeah.
to be on this side of the table with you now. I never would have thought, but God is good.
I was like, who's this kid? And he's got some stuff. I'm like, I'll bring him on. All right, he's got some hair thing. I don't know.
My hair was blonde on
I
Tucker
remember
Carlson.
I remember the blonde.
It was weird.
Yeah. I remember the blonde hair days. I was gonna make a comment the other day. I was like, I see you've gone back to
I've changed.
the OG. I think we're gonna stick with the OG on this one.
The good old days.
Yeah.
But Jack, here we are, 2022. I mean, we've talked about the Great Reset many times. I think a lot of people thought it was a conspiracy theory, this New World Order agenda, this globalist agenda. Puppet Biden, President Biden, has been in office for a couple years now, and they're open about it. It is not a secret anymore. You hear him use terms like New World Order. And right now, I think people are starting to ask themselves, what does this really look like? Like, where is this going? I mean, when you're obviously super active on Twitter, you're covering everything around the entire world. In terms of the Great Reset, in terms of this globalist agenda, how far along are we? Where do you think this is going within in the next, 3 years?
Well, I think what's amazing actually is that we've actually got a situation now where if you can go back and read about people writing in Forbes magazine as contributors to the World Economic Forum talking about the Great Reset all the way back in 2016, right? All this stuff, that ad that everybody talks about, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, that was made in 2016. That's not new, that's old, that's 6 years ago, right? And they were laying this out, and they had this one article, and I talked about it when I did Spillover, in my city, we don't own anything, and a car comes and takes us wherever we need to go, and our prescriptions are delivered to us, and our doctors are virtual, and all these different things. And I feel bad for the people who don't live in the city, the people who still try to own things and live like savages. It's basically Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And this idea that, you don't own clothes anymore, and, well, I don't have any privacy anymore, but we got used to it. Don't worry about that. So it's not actually new. This has been in the works for a long time. But what is new is the level with which the pandemic and really this kind of populist uprising that we're seeing right now that isn't necessarily left or right. It's just this sort of, up versus down kind of thing that's going on. That has thrown a wrench into all the plans of this thing. And so when you look at the Great Reset, the name of it, whatever it is, that they're trying to implement it as fast as possible now because they're terrified of what could happen when President Biden is no longer in office and that another populist conservative type is able to take power and that they're not going to be able to get all this stuff in. So that's why you're seeing a lot of these things like central bank digital currencies, like money printing, like the supply chains cracking. That wasn't supposed to happen. These things were supposed to come years and years down the line. Now they're trying to rush it all in before it was ever mature. And so I think you really do have a chance, because they're on the back foot of all this thing, you really do have a chance that if you push hard now, you can actually break it before it ever is able to take hold.
Jack, you're spot on. Throughout the whole COVID hysteria, so many people were willing to sacrifice freedoms for safety and security, right? It was, to love your neighbor. We were hearing all this religious, rhetoric from people that were willing to do this.
Well, I think it actually, for them, it's not just rhetoric, it is a religion for them, for a lot of these people. And it's not just on COVID though, but if you notice, there's this sort of through line from, kind of the early BLM to Antifa to COVID to Ukraine to Fauci, vaccine, so many different things. They all kind of fit under this headline of Mark Andreessen calls it the current thing. You must support the current thing. You cannot speak out against the current thing. You cannot criticize the current thing. And when you can criticize the current thing, it is no longer the current thing.
Yes.
Then now it has become the previous thing. So you actually can have some of these discussions about like Fauci and vaccines and mandates and lockdowns and all this now. But just a couple of months before, when it was the current thing, you weren't able to talk about it anymore. I think this is a classic situation of that frog in the pot, right? Where if you boil the frog on low, the frog will sit there, never jumps out, the water's getting hotter, You got other people in there saying, hey guys, water's getting a little hot, maybe we should do something about this heat, getting turned up, no, we're fine. Frog gets cooked. But if you turn the heat up too much, the frog will jump out of the pot. And so that's the situation we're in now. The heat is being turned up too fast. Too many of the frogs in the pot are understanding the situation that they're in, and more people are jumping out. And so, to carry that all the way through, some people say, well, that's a conspiracy theory. We've now entered the point that when the mainstream media comes down and pushes, one of these PolitiFact fact checks or Instagram and Facebook always kind of tee off of that, it's almost like that you've struck a nerve when one of the fact checks comes down, because that means that you've short-circuited the programming somewhere and they're pushing out a new, kind of patch for the narrative because, well, something's happened that's broken the narrative, and now we have to, what are these units in Ukraine with the swastikas running around? Who are those guys on? Oh no, don't talk about those guys. And then, so first it's don't talk about those guys, then it's, okay, well those guys are there, but there are not that many of them. And then it's, okay, well we do have them, but we're gonna deal with them later, right? And so it's this thing where you have narrative oversaturation, and because they're trying to control so much of thought and so much information all at once, it's unsustainable. You can't do it because you also have the democratization of information through social media, through podcasts like this, through Twitter, through the variety of other social medias that are out there. This is what's going to be able to break that power. That's why after the events of 2016, the real populist uprising that happened, both with Brexit and the election of 2016, that's why they put the shackles on the internet, right? If that had never happened, you would never had censorship. No one would be ever talking about this stuff because they would still view it as this sort of just fringe online chat forum.
And that's not a conspiracy theory. Google admitted to that. After the election,
100%.
they openly admitted to
Alan
that.
Bukhari at Breitbart had the video from that internal Google meeting where they're crying, they're weeping up on stage. Sundar Pichai, the leaders of Google, and are saying, we're never going to allow this to happen again.
Exactly, and what's on the line is freedom. And we're seeing the destruction of Western society, and I want to talk about culture right now. Like
Yeah.
we're seeing this with, this pedo simp, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, that is the most qualified apparently to President Joe Biden, that is so lenient on pedophiles, child pornographers. We're seeing the opposition of the anti-grooming bill in Disney getting behind that opposition as well. We're seeing that in Florida. We're seeing so many, the child mutilation of kids that identify as the opposite of their biological sex. These things have now become normalized in our society, and it's a further attack on humanity. So where does that play in as well? Because this is happening to the United States on a daily basis.
So I was just having a conversation with Morgan Zegers, and we were talking about the rise of social Darwinism in the progressive era, and how a lot of this really came to power under Wilson, and these Wilsonian ideas of having an organic state, and how that organic state kind of usurped the original plan of the founders for a functioning republic, three-branch democracy. Why do we care so much about Supreme Court nominees, by the way? Well, because we know that that's where power comes from, because we go to the courts for things now. We don't go to the legislature anymore, right? So we get laws from the bench. So take an extremely controversial social issue, something that's completely disparate with like abortion. We know that abortion laws aren't coming from Congress, that comes from the courts. Same-sex marriage, that wasn't decided by our elected representatives, that wasn't following democracy, that Obergefell came from the courts, right? Regardless of what side you're on, you have to understand this didn't follow the system as the way it was written out. All of this goes back though to this idea that who did and what was it that the social Darwinists targeted first? God in the public sector. They targeted God in the public sector, the public square. And if you remove God from the public square, what you're really doing is removing society's direct moral center and society's direct moral compass. So if you take that away, you take away morality and the source of morality being God, you create what? You have pick and choose morality, right? Choose your own morality. And so that's what creates the conditions that allow a Ketanji Brown Jackson justice to come up there and say, well, I don't think that I'm paraphrasing, of course. So that's for PolitiFact out there, because I've been fact-checked like 3 times by them on the KBJ nomination already, talking about this issue. And when I said, she doesn't seem to think it's a big problem, they were downloading such mass quantities of child pornography, and they fact-checked me. Even though I'm disagreeing with her opinion, I'm making an opinion statement, a moral judgment, saying that yes, morally it is worse because there are more child victims. When they were pointing out, well, they said, well, no. The way she looks at it is, her view is that because of technology and because of society, that actually the perpetrator is a victim of technology and a victim of society. So therefore, we should be more lenient on the perpetrator because they are a victim of the situation that they're in. And I look around and I say, well, I suppose that's one view of morality, but I'm going to side with the children who survived this horrific, and it is rape, and it is torture, and it is abuse, and then they're not doing it for just 15 minutes or 20 minutes or however long a video is. That's their whole life.
Yeah.
That's their whole life that they become victimized because of this, and that they have trauma, they have to go through therapy, so many problems. You can speak to any survivor of this, and it's very clear, and there's lots of data on this for the follow the data, follow the science crowd. But the idea being though is that for a KBJ, in her mind and in the minds of so many people in this criminal justice movement, they believe that the actual, oppressor, this is also a Marxian critical theory kind of construct. The idea is that these oppressors versus the oppressed, and that so in an oppressive society, it is therefore the oppressed who are then the victims of society itself. Therefore, their crimes are merely reflections of their own oppression. And so we should be lighter on them because they are victimized by the oppression of society writ large. It's completely backwards, upside down thinking to side with a criminal over to side with society itself. But that's what creates it, because if you take God out of it, then all that's left is power, and people deciding whatever they feel like can become their own morality.
And this is where we are, and I wanted to talk about faith with you too, Jack, because we have to show honor to where honor is due. There are pastors out there, there are churches out there that are aggressively, openly challenging these doctrines of demons, challenging these evil cultural ideologies, challenging cultural Marxism and these just evil ideas, right? But there is a huge part of the American church that is silent. They don't want to get involved. They'll call, I mean, I've been a part of this as well. When I was a youth pastor, you know, I would get criticized for speaking out against abortion.
Right.
And then the senior pastor comes out and says, we don't want to get political.
I
These
have
aren't political issues.
I have a buddy who he's actually not a believer, funny enough, but he's yeah, I'm working on him.
Yeah.
But he came up with this term for it. He calls it Omicron Christianity. So it's basically this idea of, so Omicron, of course, being the weakest COVID variant, this idea that it's highly communicable, but it doesn't actually share any of the traits of the original stronger variant. You've stripped it away to all but its most basic, you know, surface level kind of perfunctory facets and features. So you essentially get this guy with long hair and a beard who's like walking around in sandals. And that's the version of Christianity that seems to be the one that's dominant right now, as opposed to this more orthodox view of Christianity, which is one that is much rooted in that society, but in a true understanding of what that society was like, of what religion was like at the time, of actual moral judgments, having this idea of there is a body of church law that coexists alongside the civil law. And so you do have church authorities, you have religious authorities that are as much power in society. I mean, this goes back to the crucifixion of Jesus itself, right? The idea that it was religious authorities that convicted him, and then the sentence was carried out by the civil authorities.
Yes. And I think, you know, I think there is a lot of cowards, to be honest. I think there's a lot of men in the church, not just in the country or in the world, that, you know, they'll use that as a scapegoat.
Oh, of course.
Right? When you're dealing with some serious issues, right? When you're dealing with some serious issues that the church should be openly vocal about, I think it's just a scapegoat to come out and say, oh, Romans says we, you know, shouldn't really get involved. The government's its own thing. It serves its own purpose. We're just to, you know, build the kingdom of God here on earth. But that's just a scapegoat to get out of actually getting your feet dirty with some serious issues here on planet Earth as a Christian.
It's what they're trying to do is create, and I do think there's people that actually do understand what it is and how it is this sort of softening, this chastening of our original beliefs and the original religion and the orthodoxy of the church into understanding that, no, when they say create the kingdom, what they're talking about is this moral order. And that doesn't mean this, you know, sort of like, what do they call it, the Handmaid's Tale. I actually remember I was there when the Handmaid's, do you remember they were using the Handmaid's Tale protesters for the Kavanaugh thing?
Yes.
So I was coming through Union Station, and when I worked at OAN, I used to come through there every day, and I saw a bunch of the protesters that were dressed up in the Handmaid's Tale garb, but they didn't have their hoods on. And they were all getting Starbucks. Like, I guess like their shift hadn't started yet. And I recognized Lacey McCauley, who at the time, or I guess prior to that, had been the head of DC Antifa, was dressed up as one of the Handmaid's girls. And I was like, oh, so I looked at, and I was live on Periscope, which was like Twitter Live, they used to have it. And I was like, oh, Lacey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you at work, you know? And, you know, realizing that it's, you know, we're talking about a moral order. We're just talking about having traditional, like, you know, that, what blows my mind, and Gen X is guilty of this, where you'll see a picture of like a family from the 1950s. They're dressed nice. They're going out. They're shopping. They're going to church. You know, dad's looking nice. Mom's looking nice. Kids are all dressed up, and they have this like visceral reaction to that, and they say, "Well, I bet he beats her at home." Like, why would you say that? Like, what possibly gives you any indication that this guy is, you know, a domestic abuser, and oh, I bet she hates him, and she probably is cheating on him every night and every chance she gets, when it's just a picture of a normal American family. And you realize the level of social conditioning and social programming that's gone in through, and a lot of this does come back to social Darwinism. And so we think as a society, we're still grappling with this massive upheaval that we've had first with the Industrial Revolution and now with the technological revolution that has given us so much in society, but at the same time, it's led us towards this path of hedonism and realizing that, and I'm a firm believer in things that are sinful are actually bad for you, right? And so in the long, at first, you know, this instant gratification, like, oh, it seems great, it's awesome, you get whatever you want, pick up the, you know, piece of glass and just order whatever you want, and it comes right to your door, you don't have to do anything. But over time, that turns you into, Wall-E, right? That's, the situation where there's this ark ship and everyone's just, fat and lazy and stupid and not really living life, right? And so to an extent, of course, in the long run, that's worth it. That's much, much worse for you. And so as a society, we have to find a way to balance this massive technological innovation that we have, but also not letting it destroy our lives.
And I think a lot of people have been indoctrinated in like universities, right? Especially millennials and Gen Zs coming up right behind them, where, we should forsake all forms of morality in the name of liberalism.
Right.
They're being lied to believe that it's liberal to just throw all law. We can even say law. I mean, you and I have both been in Chaz, and we've seen these ideas in real time where it's like law gone because they think that it's liberal, but people need to understand that there is no society with that.
What was so amazing
you can't
to
have
me,
a stable society.
What was so amazing to me about Chaz? Were you there the night when they attacked that? It was like a car lot that was down the road, and then they were going after the guy, and it all came down to, supposedly this guy had been a thief and that he had broken into the car lot. I wasn't even really associated with Chaz, but he had broken into the car lot because he knew it was nearby and knew there was no cops in that area, so of course it's attracting
criminal activity.
This is also what led to the drug gangs going into Chaz late at night, and that's where you get, this dude, Simone and all his guys. But this thief had gone in, tries to get in there and was stealing all the keys because he thought if he got all the keys, then later he could come back and steal the cars, as if like they didn't know that somebody had stolen all the keys and that they wouldn't think to guard all the cars. Someone, when I was getting started in the IC, I had an instructor at one point who was former NYPD homicide, and he said, and I was asking some questions about that, and I'm like, well, isn't that a really stupid move? Why wouldn't he just do this? And he said, Posobiec, most people, when they turn to crime to make a living, they aren't necessarily the smartest people to begin with. Yeah. So anyway, dude comes back, and then he gets chased down by Raz and the owner's son. I think he had like an AR, and they were chasing him down. Then this whole mob out in Chaz ends up putting him up against, you remember this? He puts him up against the car, and then Raz says, open your bag. And the guy says, who are you to tell me to open my bag? And I was like, this is it right here.
Yeah.
This is it right here. This is the reason for society, the reason for law, the reason for a moral code, the reason that we have individual rights, the reason we have all of these things that we take for granted. You take that out the window, guess what? Human nature, still there.
Yes.
So human nature is the first instance. And if that is the first instance because of the fall, because of the Garden of Eden, because of the apple, right, we have a flawed nature. All men and women, right, you have to say it that way now, all men and women have a flawed nature. We're all sinful. And so how do we deal with that nature? And so these are the dual tracks of it. One side, the traditional side, is we have a flawed nature and we must come up with institutions and laws to deal with this nature. But the other side believes we can make you better. We can reform you, we can be made into greater beings than the humans that we initially are. And so this is where you get the Great Reset. This is where you get KBJ saying that I can reform these pedophiles, sometimes repeat pedophiles, repeat offenders. This is where this idea becomes, and I'm not saying you can't overcome sin and addiction and stuff like that, but it's this actual belief that we can overcome and ascend from our human selves, but not in a spiritual way, because remember, they reject spirituality. So not in a sense of ascending to a higher plane of going to heaven, but actually here create heaven on earth. And that is deeply, deeply, it's anti-Christian, it's anti-biblical, and it is itself a form of blasphemy.
It is anti-Christ, because I mean, you take a look at the Bible, the word anti is pseudo-Christ. It's in the place of.
It's believing that we can be demigods.
Exactly. It's Satan trying to be in the position of God. And of course, humanity unchecked is going to do the exact same thing. So to go to your point, you're 100% accurate, because you're seeing this happen time and time. It's a cult. It's a cult. Everything that God offers, freedom, to have your eyes opened, all these things that the gospel offers us, like throughout the Bible, the left offers that, and these like leftist cultists offer the same thing, and these globalists offer the same thing, but it's a human device,
right,
and it leads to more tyranny. And it's like, we haven't learned from communism, we haven't learned from socialism.
No.
It's just an ongoing human device that just ensnares and oppresses people fully. What I wanted to ask you too, Jack, like what?
Because it's also it's also like when I talk about the moral order, and the reason I'm tying that to sin and also what's good for you is the idea that it's yes, there is a path, and so people get so wrapped up in the idea that, oh well, I'll be punished if I step off the path. But no, it's not like that. This is the path to success.
Yeah.
Follow this path. Narrow is the path, right? Narrow is the gate. And this is the path that actually leads you to the greatest success. But if you want to, buck that authority, and if you want to chat, you want to get mad, and you want to resist, that's what puts you on the other path.
Absolutely. Last question, Jack. I wanted to ask you. We got about 4.5 minutes left. Right now, 2022, where we're at, what is the number one thing that you see on the horizon, or that's currently happening right now in real time, that's concerning you the most?
Well, I think it does get back to kind of where we started, is this idea that, as a country and sort of as a system, the West is responding to the rise of China. Now we see the rise of Russia, but we're responding to it in a way of our elites telling us, how can we become more like the CCP? How can we become more authoritarian? How can we have more total control over people's lives? The city of Shanghai, as we speak right now, has 26 million people that are under lockdown. They're bringing in military troops. They're forcing people into lockdown. They're putting them in quarantine chambers if they test positive, right? They know that this doesn't actually lead to greater health incomes. It's about control. And our elites are looking at that. And when I lived in Shanghai, I saw this. They would come in and they would talk to members of the CCP and they say, how do we do that? How do we get that? If you want to have a maglev, if you want to have a pipeline across Xinjiang and the Uyghurs are in the way, what do you do? How do you respond? They're trying to institute that system across the entire West. They want to remove personal identity. They want to remove national identity. They want to remove borders. They want to remove all these things that make us unique and special and creations of God, and replace it with this global homogenized nothingness that they have total control over.
And we're seeing this happen time after time after time. And it's just, I know sometimes it can feel exhausting just saying the same thing. Oh, we were talking about this earlier. It's like we're reporting on the same things over and over again. And without God's strength, without His grace, it gets exhausting out here.
The Lord gives us all talents for certain reasons, and He asks us to use them.
Yeah, absolutely. What would be, your advice to, because here we are, Turning Point USA. There's a lot of college students that are seeing this stuff, that might be hearing this stuff for the first time, maybe comparing what you're saying to their, psychopath woke teacher or a university professor. What would be your encouragement to a young, because Gen Z is in such a vulnerable place right now. They really are.
Well,
what would you say to them?
I would say, you look at the two worlds, right? You look at the traditional world, you look at the world that made sense, and then you look at what's going on now. Does this country right now seem like it's being led by people who know what they're doing? Right? No, obviously not. And so maybe you should listen to the people who actually do have a plan to get us out of this mire and this muck and this just nastiness that we're trapped in right now, and actually go to more of a promised place, and not this false promise of everything's going to be free and you get all the health care and education you want and it's going to be perfect, and climate change will cease and there'll be no fuel, and all these different things. But no, a true understanding and taking stock of the way life is, the way human nature is, understanding it and then overcoming it, so that as a society we can actually achieve that same type of excellence. And so it's personal betterment, it's social betterment, it means better relationships, it means better relationships with your parents, with your kids, if you have kids yet. I think there's so many ways that we can do this. Talking about kids, this whole idea about, you can't be your kid's little buddy. They're not your little buddies, right? They're your children, right? So you can be friends with them. I play so many games with my kids, right? But at the end of the day, they're the children, I'm the father, and it's got to be that way.
Absolutely. Well, Jack, thank you so much for joining me. This is Jack Posobiec, host of Human Events Daily, the real 007, James Bond. Well, America, these are serious conversations. I don't know if there are people watching that, may have heard terms like Great Reset, New World Order, all these agendas that you may have heard on other shows, or you may have heard on other networks, and you've maybe read an article that slandered someone saying that this is some kind of right-wing conspiracy theory. You don't need to listen to me. You don't need to listen to Jack. Just turn on your TV. They tell you themselves. They tell you that this is an agenda that's unfolding. Look what's happening to the kids, the children that are being targeted on a daily basis, where these open pedophile simps want the right to isolate your children. Look across the United States of America. Look at the indoctrination that's happening in universities. Look at the indoctrination that's happening in high school, K through 12, the list goes on. You always know where a society is when you look at how they deal with their children. My name is Drew Hernandez. These are the Frontlines, and TPUSA Live starts right now.